was your childhood with a Christian family? How did you feel when you were praying?
He said, there's no room in our religion to ask questions. And he honestly told me, if you cannot believe this, he said, the only place you'll find is hell. The only place you'll find is hell. I wore my hijab, but at the same time, by choosing to do so, immediately I became non-American. And immediately after the attack on the Twin Towers, police surrounded the school. The reason for the police surrounding the school is they were worried that Americans in Texas would come and try and retaliate and attack the Islamic school.
It's needed. Do you need backup?
So the police came to the school. We were told to close the curtains of the classroom and even crawl along the floor, keeping the children out of the view of the windows.
How did you feel when you took Shahada?
Oh, it was so emotional. And I get emotional thinking about it now. And probably because as a revert, you want everything to be perfect because Islam is the perfect religion. And as human beings, we're far from perfect. So living up to that perfection and falling short causes a revert, especially me. It made me feel less than perfect a lot of the time. So that was difficult. But when you're newly converted, I was so excited and so happy. And I wanted everybody to be happy for me. And that's not always realistic either. I am Suzanne Hitto. I'm a revert to Islam. I was born and raised in a very small farming village about an hour west of Chicago, Illinois. Basically a village that had two churches, one Methodist, one Lutheran, and I was raised in the Lutheran Church, which is a very conservative branch of Protestantism. I'm the youngest of 6 children. My oldest sister is 19 years older than I am, and I almost was raised like an only child. My family was very committed to their faith and attending church, and it included not only Sundays, but Bible study on Wednesday nights, and most of the community activities revolved around the church community.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We saw that 80% of our audience, including this video, are not subscribed to our channel. As you know, we are a non-profit organization and advertisements are disabled on our videos. So the only reason we are asking for this is to spread the truth. It may seem like a small act, but inshallah, it may be a means of guidance for many people. Now let's click the subscribe button and let's walk as an eternal passenger.
How was your childhood with a Christian family?
My childhood, I would hope, was very similar to how I raised my children. Very faith-centered, strong belief in God and understanding our place, like we are here to serve and worship. My parents were very giving and supportive to the community around them. They were accepting, loving, and supporting all the people around them.
When did you start questioning your beliefs?
The greatest questioning came when I went to university and started seeing people from other cultures, other religions. And I think the turning point was actually at Concordia, being a Christian-based university, we had to study the Bible in depth, meaning looking at each chapter, looking at the translation, where it's coming from, the Greek and the Latin. And I had an Old Testament class, meaning the older books of the Bible, basically the Torah section. And we came to a Bible verse that talks about covering and worship. And in the particular Bible verse, it says, before translation into modern English, it says a woman should cover when she worships. So I asked the professor, I said, how do we go from covering our heads when we worship to not having to cover? And he said, well, this is something old from the Bible, and we really don't have to do that anymore. I said, but if God says we need to cover when we worship, and Christianity believes that everything we do is worship, then why did we lose that habit of covering? And he said, I'll have to see you after class. So I got a little bit concerned, and I went to his office after class, and he told me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm asking questions." He said, "There's no room in our religion to ask questions. You must believe that the Bible is the infallible word of God." And I said, "That doesn't make any sense." And he honestly told me, "If you cannot believe this," he said, "the only place you'll find is hell." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Yes." And then I knew that if we can't question and be logical about our religion, like Islam, then it wasn't right for me.
Why did you choose Islam to search?
It really started with that research paper in the world religion class. And the world religion class, we all had to pick a topic: Taoism, Buddhism, Baha'ism, Judaism. So every student picked something that they felt comfortable in. The choice that I made to research Islam really came because the care that I saw from the Muslims. I got a very cold answer from my religious professor when he told me, "If you don't believe in the Bible, you'll go to hell." The Christian community was very ready to push me aside, tell me that I was a sinner, tell me that I was doing something wrong for questioning religion. But the reaction from Muslims, the Muslim friends and students that I knew, was completely different. They were accepting of me whether I was Christian or Muslim or anything. But when I told them that I was considering Islam or even just researching Islam, they were so welcoming, so helpful, and they said, "Make sure you're comfortable. Don't make any quick decisions."
What was your first step about doing Islamic research?
As I started my research, I went to the university library and looked for books on Islam. And it had Maududis towards understanding Islam. There was a copy of Qur'an al-Karim, but only in English. There was no Arabic with it. I knew something wasn't right because obviously the Qur'an is not revealed in English. So I knew from the religious training that when there are translations, there are problems. So I knew that the translation of Qur'an in English only wasn't enough. So I went to the public library in the neighborhood. And again, very little literature or books or information for me to continue my research. So I went back to my friends and said, "Where am I going to get books? I need to know more about Islam." And they just kind of, "Okay, sure." They didn't know what to do about that. And finally, I asked one girl, Shadada. I was in her room and I had seen her pray in her dorm room. I asked her, do you know where I can go to find your church?" And she laughed. She said, "We don't have churches. We have mosques. There's one very close if you want to go." So I said, "Okay, but don't I have to cover my head?" And she laughed at me. She said, "Okay." So I actually borrowed her prayer scarf. And she said, "You don't have to." And I said, "Okay, I understand." But when I went and stood for the bus, I put on my prayer scarf, which was kind of funny because it covered all the way to my knees. And I'm sure I was a sight. But I got on the bus and I went down 95th Street in Chicago until I got to the mosque and Islamic Center there. And I wasn't sure where to go in. Of course, I went in the wrong door, men only. And I was quickly told, no, use the sisters' entrance. When I heard the adhan, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and I knew what the words meant, but when I looked around at the beauty of the mosque and heard those words, I suddenly felt so small and everything else so big. It was the place for me. And of course, as I was standing there were sisters rushing in for the namaz, and they were like pushing me in line, just get in line, get in line. And one sister put her shoulder very close to mine, and I had no idea what I was doing. And she asked me, "Do you know how to pray?" And I said, "No." And so I sort of made the movements, even though I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have my hands in the right position. And she just tapped me after the prayer was finished, and she said, "You'll get the hang of it." And that was my first introduction to actual Islamic worship. Immediately after the Friday prayer, I went to the Imam's office and asked about where I could get books about Islam. And he was kind of businesslike. I'm sure he was very busy because it's Friday prayer and he didn't want to be caught with a young woman in his office. Lots of men were waiting for him. But he directed me to the library, and that's where I was very happily met by the librarian who gave me lots of books about Islam.
How did you feel when you were praying?
At first, I was very overwhelmed. I really felt, again, how small I was, especially with the great number of people making namaz. I mean, there must have been probably 200 sisters in a very small space. So I felt very awkward and very out of place and very tiny, like almost like when you stand on the beach and you look out at the ocean and you see everything in front of you and you become very small. I felt that way. But then afterwards, I felt so at peace. Like after the building got empty and I had my books, I didn't want to leave. Like I felt I wanted to stay in that place and just be at peace.
So, when did this research turn from being a homework into a religious conversion?
In the research process, I read an incredible book called The Bible, Qur'an, and Science. This book takes scientific fact and compares it to what's in the Bible and verses of the Qur'an. So it came from probably Surah Al-Alaq, talking about the creation, how biologically a drop becomes congealed blood, becomes bone surrounded by flesh. And this is given to us in the Qur'an. In the Bible, it's nowhere to be found. But the Qur'an so delicately explains this biological process that even, 150, 200 years ago, doctors were just discovering how this whole process occurs. That's something that you can't deny, that our Creator revealed to the believers this process when science was so far behind. So this was probably, at that point, I remember reading it. I had been newly married. When I read this in the book, I just started weeping, like tears would not stop. My husband, we were very newly married at the time. I called him and I said, I have to do this. And he's like, calm down, you're crying too much. What's the problem? And I said, I know I need to be a Muslim. And he said, wait a minute. He said, I've never done this before. I was born a Muslim. I don't know anything about this. He said, please call Sheikh Jamal. He said, tell him that you're ready, to make this decision. But he told me, please make sure. I said, I'm sure. And I said, I need to make my Shahada tonight. And he said, simple. I said, what do you mean? I want something like, what do I do? What do I do? He said, tell me. I said, what should I tell you? He said, say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu Muhammadan Rasulullah. And I did. He said, okay, now you have to tell me in English so I can be sure that you know what it means. And so he said, repeat after me. And I did. And that was it. And I said, that's all I have to do to be Muslim? And he said, welcome to Islam. So I called my husband back. No cell phones at the time. We had to use a regular telephone on the wall. I said, I did it. I took my Shahada. I'm a Muslim. I was blessed not to have the dramatic situation where family was ready to cut their ties with me, kick them out of the family. I know that's happened to revert friends, but my family were quietly accepting. They weren't very overt about it. They didn't, have a party for me, but there wasn't a screaming and yelling. I think they just reflected on what happened. For friends, I had already made the choice to change my behavior. So the people that I would go out on the weekend with and probably have some non-Islamic behavior, I had already made the choice to leave that behind. So they knew that they didn't need to include me in any of that. So my friends sort of dropped off the list by themselves, and I developed a new group of friends. So they were very accepting.
Was it hard for you to wear the hijab? How did you feel when you first stepped outside with the hijab?
I basically took Shahada probably on a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and the very next day I wore my hijab. It was a bit overwhelming. Of course, I was proud to do it because I felt it was my obligation as being a Muslim, but at the same time, by choosing to do so, immediately I became non-American. And many people would say, you don't have to wear that, you're American. Put it aside. You don't need to do that. But you can be Muslim and American too, or you can be Muslim and whatever nationality you are. So I felt a bit shy, but at the same time, I knew what the reason for it was. And it really did serve its purpose. It helped remind me that I'm special in my creation and in the universe. That has to be protected. And I need to protect that. I can't expect anybody to do that for me. It's a personal statement. And that's how I felt about it.
Did you have any certain cases in Indiana?
So it was a wonderful time for me being newly Muslim and having access to so much information. From there, I moved to the Islamic Society of North America, the largest Islamic organization in the US, and I helped with organizing conventions. Every year they have an annual convention. I was very young, but I was in there, helping create contracts for the hotels and the convention center. And there again, meeting some incredible Muslims. I have one very fond memory of actually meeting Muhammad Ali and his wife Lani. Our children were very young, and my son, probably 2-3 years old, Muhammad Ali reached down and picked up my son in his arms. And the first thing my son did was put his little fist up and want to punch at Muhammad Ali. And he was such a gentle soul, and he just laughed and, threw my son in the air like lots of uncles do with their nieces and nephews.
Have you ever faced with Islamophobia?
In the year of the 9/11 attacks, I was teaching at an Islamic school, and a lot of people don't understand the impact of 9/11 on the Muslim community in the United States very well. But I was in a classroom with fifth graders, so 10, 11 years old. And immediately after the attack on the Twin Towers, police surrounded the school. And of course, people got very nervous. The reason for the police surrounding the school is they were worried that Americans in Texas would come and try and retaliate and attack the Islamic school. So the police came to the school. We were told to close the curtains of the classroom and even crawl along the floor, keeping the children out of the view of the windows. It was a very scary time. I was in the grocery store and I was ready to pick up some bread from the shelf, and somebody I noticed walked behind me, just somebody from the grocery store, and the woman actually spit on my back. And I was surprised, I didn't realize what happened. And I walked to the front of the store and I was obviously very upset. And the cashier, she said, "Are you okay?" And I told her, that lady who just left, she actually spit on me. And the lady looked at me surprised and she said, "Do you want me to call the police?" And I said, No, I don't want to cause any trouble today. And she said, "No, you need to call the police." And I said, "No, please don't." But I don't know. I've had mixed feelings about this because as a community, we were already feeling the pressure of being suspects, and I didn't want to propel that. So this was probably the worst of the Islamophobia. And I've had lots and lots of positive experiences with Americans as a Muslim in the United States. So I would say that was truly an exception and not the general situation.
If you had the chance to watch it, which day would you choose from the life of our Prophet, peace be upon him?
As much as I talk, I'm really kind of a quiet person, and I love being alone. If there's one moment, it would be his moment in the cave. That kind of solitude and just shutting the world away and being open to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. I think that's important. Sometimes we push ourselves to be more active, to be more busy, to be more involved. But I think there are times that we just need to step back and be quiet and be accepting of what Allah has planned.
If there was a chance to speak directly to all non-Muslims in the world, what would you like to say to them?
If you want to really be in tune to your creator and creation, Islam is the way. But it takes an open heart and an open mind. But it will take you to the path of understanding your creator and creation.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for allowing the opportunity to tell my simple story. Please, I'd encourage you all to tune in to Eternal Passenger and see the stories of other people like me.